Who's going to slow down this Duke basketball team? They are red hot, one of the best teams in the entire country, and what a thrilling victory they had over North Carolina this past weekend. Today, we move on to the next one, though. Duke at Syracuse. Let's preview the Blue Devils with our good pal, Brendan Marks, coming up on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us today on Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. Locked On Blue Devils is your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on in the life of Duke athletics with a big-time focus on what takes place in the world of Duke men's basketball. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review, particularly there on the Apple Podcast platform, as we're so grateful for your support here on the program. Also, if you haven't done so already, you can watch the show on YouTube each and every day. We're getting so close to 3,000 subscribers, and I cannot wait to celebrate that milestone with you guys here on Locked On Blue Devils, and your support is the big reason why the show continues to grow. Like this video, share it with your friends, do all those fun things for us to help continue grow Locked On Blue Devils. We're on X at LO_Blue Devils. Brendan Marks of The Athletic is here with us on today's show. We're talking about the big-time win for the Blue Devils over North Carolina this past weekend, turning their attention to Syracuse, over halfway done with this conference schedule so far for Duke. And Brendan, so many ways, it feels like just yesterday we were talking about those late-game struggles that Duke had against Kentucky and Kansas, and how are they going to respond with the big games with Arizona and Auburn still on their schedule. Now you look, 15 games have gone by, and they've won every single one of them.
Yeah, it's been a decent little stretch here if you're a Duke fan. I think basically what we've seen is that this team is getting closer to reaching the potential that Jon Scheyer thought that it had when he first built the roster. And you knew that Duke had a chance to be good this year. Obviously, Jon Scheyer went against the grain a little bit in how he built this team, really essentially handing the keys to Cooper Flagg, a 17-year-old at the time. And all we've seen over the past month is Cooper Flagg turn into the best player in all of college basketball. So as he has ascended, so has Duke. No, there have not been any close games. I think, it's funny at this point, I think Duke fans are worried they haven't played a close game in quite a while. But there's a chance that maybe later this week they'll have one of those. And, certainly 15 game winning streak. It's the longest at Duke in over a decade now. And I would not expect that to slow down tonight against Syracuse.
Yeah, no, we'll get to that game certainly in just a moment. And the run that Duke has been on, you mentioned Cooper Flagg's ascension throughout the course of the year. So many other freshmen have taken those next steps. The defense has been there really throughout the course of this entire season. Now the offense is kind of following along with it. As I was talking with our buddy Connor O'Neill on yesterday's show, he makes the point that it's easier for your offense to improve when your defense stays so steady and so forceful and dominant on that end. But that's been so awesome to watch, is just how much better Duke's also getting on that offensive end of the floor.
Yeah, and again, I do think a lot of that goes back to Cooper Flagg. Shocker. He has a huge imprint on Duke this season. And, again, I think obviously we can talk about some of the strides he's made as a shooter. Goes from being a guy who early in the season was well under 30% to a guy who now over the last month has been at 40% or better. He's regularly knocking down catch and shoots. He's shown an ability to create for himself. But he has really turned into this team's de facto point guard. Especially now that Sion James has entered the starting lineup instead of Caleb Foster. Cooper is handling a lot of those creation duties, and the gravity that he just creates by himself. It's kind of like when you watch a quarterback manipulate a defense with his eyes. He looks at the safety goes one way and he throws it the other way. Cooper is doing that on the court too. So certainly he has been a huge reason why Duke's offense is booming right now. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The defense has been a constant all season. If the offense is playing at this level, there's reason for Duke fans to start looking at San Antonio tickets.
So some of the games that Duke hasn't played as well on the offensive end, it's simply just been they're not making shots. And that's the unfortunate reality of this game that we love. Some days you just don't got it, and the ball's not finding the back of the rim, so you've got to find kind of other ways to make an impact and that sort of thing. Knueppel comes to mind, right, where there have been games where you look at the box score at the end of it, Brendan, and he's not been efficient whatsoever. but yet he's still made winning plays when they needed it. He's still gotten better each and every game when they need to make a shot, even if it's been an off night. You can rely on Knueppel to knock it down and make those type of plays. He has been, you can make the constant puns with his first name being Con or whatever you want to do.
That was good. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been really fun to watch him throughout the course of the year because there have been, like I said, some of those inefficient games, but it doesn't slow him down at all.
No, and I mean, I think you could, and I probably would make the argument that in the second half against North Carolina, he was the best player on the court. I mean, North Carolina absolutely could not stop him. His ability, obviously the Luka Doncic trade is the biggest thing in the sport.
Sure.
Athletically speaking, Con sort of comes to mind as a similar body type. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, but his balance, the way he gets into the lane and plays off 2 feet, his fundamentals are just so sound. And you combine that with his, sort of relentlessness in pursuing loose balls and fighting through screens and getting open, making back cuts, freeing up his teammates. As much as we talk about Cooper Flagg obviously being the head of the snake for this Duke team, and Duke is going to go as far as he leads them, I think if you're someone who looks at Duke, as I do, as a national title contender, as a legitimate, front runner almost to win the national title, as much of that comes from Con Knueppel being a secondary scoring option as it does from Cooper Flagg. And it's exactly for the reason you're describing. Even when he's not hitting shots, he finds a way to make a difference in the game. And the second half against North Carolina, he was sensational.
Excited to see how this Duke team can continue to improve on the offensive end of the floor. They can still be better defensively in some areas, which is just crazy to sort of sit there and think about. So I'm really excited to see this team take the next step and what's next for this Duke basketball team. Tyrese Proctor, another guy who's been really fun to watch as of late too.
Yeah, I thought he had made a little bit of a bounce back in the North Carolina game. Against Wake Forest, he obviously hit the late three-pointer that was so pivotal to the Blue Devils actually coming out with that win. I didn't think he had a great game before that. Con Knueppel even said he couldn't throw a pea in the ocean. He hit the biggest one, so that's all that matters. But, when I look at this Duke team, to me, the constants are Cooper Flagg, Con Knueppel, Kaman Malawach, Malik Brown now that he's back and healthy. You know what you're getting from those guys. I thought that Tyrese Proctor and Sion James, the last few games before North Carolina, had stumbled a little bit. They didn't look quite as good as they had earlier this season, as they had earlier during this winning streak. And, for me, those guys are so important because if they're not legitimate threats from the outside, for Tyrese, especially if his offense is hitting, then sometimes defensively he takes a step back. I thought those guys, the way they rebounded versus North Carolina, Jon Scheyer even said post-game, he was very intentional about making sure he got Tyrese Proctor some shots. Tyrese Proctor has to be involved for Duke to be able to be its best version of itself. The catch and shoots, just having another ball handler, having somebody with some confidence. He is essential for Duke's success over the rest of this season. So it was good to see him get back on track against Duke.
Duke gets set to take on Syracuse a little bit later tonight. They've got Clemson coming up this weekend, which a lot of people have kind of circled in as that next big test for the Blue Devils as well. All right, we'll take a break real quickly, and then on the other side, more thoughts from Brendan Marks, who joins us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at GameTime. Are you looking for tickets to your next big event? Whether it's a concert, comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with GameTime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With GameTime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using GameTime Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. I've recently grabbed a super deal for a prime seat, and I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal. Also, the seat view within the app is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I could see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue. It's so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with GameTime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Are you ready to make your next event even better? Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. GameTime is a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Okay, let's keep this thing rolling with Brendan Marks of The Athletic. I'm JJ Jackson. We're talking about an 11-0 Duke basketball team in the ACC for the first time since 2005, 2006. And now they get set to take on Syracuse, a team that is 10-12 on the year. What is there to know about a sub-500 team in the ACC in Syracuse, Brendan?
Nothing good. And unfortunately, this is kind of more the same for Duke this season. Like, you are accruing these crazy win streaks and, doing things that haven't been done in a decade or longer. Like you said, 11-0 in conference play for the first time since 05-06. And it's because there are so many bad teams that Duke is just, it's not even in the same ballpark in terms of competitiveness. Syracuse is no exception here. I really struggled to see, I don't know what the line is as of us talking, JJ, but I can't imagine that it's going to be, anything other than 11, 12, 13 points.
Right.
It's just the way it has been for the majority of this season. So, I think it's another opportunity for Duke to at least go on the road, to be in a big time environment. Obviously the dome is what it is. That I think is something that Duke can take away from this game. But at the same time, in terms of like, what you're actually going to benefit from, it almost feels like, as is the case with Syracuse, has been with a couple of these games in this Duke winning streak, Duke's playing not to lose, just like, there isn't a lot to write home about. Syracuse is one of the worst defensive teams in the country. Offensively, they really struggled when J.J. Starling was out. He's been back. They do have talent. And obviously, I think probably from the Duke perspective, the most interesting thing is Malik Brown making his homecoming, which will be interesting to see.
Yeah, I love that. It's something that obviously we weren't very used to 5, 6, 7 years ago and before in the sport, where so frequently you've got these players that are transferring not only to other schools and eligible the next year immediately, but within the own conference and against teams that they might have played well against in prior seasons. And so here we go. Malik Brown scores 26 in Cameron last night against Syracuse. And you got to wonder, okay, is there a big game coming now against his old squad now that he's playing for Duke?
Yeah, I mean, if it is, that's great. We have seen Duke guys, perform in those environments before. I still think that Duke is, still slow playing it a little bit with Malik. Obviously, whatever he does tonight doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things compared to what he does in March. But yeah, I would like to think that Jon Scheyer is going to drop a couple of looks for him, try and get him something involved early. And I will say this, if there is something you can say about Syracuse, they do have some length, they do have some size. Which is not something you could have said about Syracuse the past couple of seasons. So I do think in that respect, Malik is going to be an important piece for Duke tonight. And yeah, I mean, it would fit with Jon Scheyer very well for him to drop a couple of things for Malik to get going against his old team. Yeah,
well, you look it up. I mean, you see the roster. You see someone like Eddie Lampkin Jr., who's well acquainted with the transfer portal himself. 6'11", 265. They don't make those often, Brendan.
He's a big boy. He's a big boy. I remember seeing him last year. I was out at USC, and he was playing for Colorado, and seeing him there. And he was at TCU before that. I mean, he's been all over the place. So. But again, Lampkin, he's a real big, and in a conference that, quite frankly, hasn't had that many of those. I mean, you look at the quote unquote bigs that Duke was going up against in North Carolina game. Like, there are not a lot of bigs in the conference that are going to give Duke and its combination of Malawach and Malik Brown and Pat Ngongba not really going to give him much, resistance. Yeah. So I think actually having an opportunity to do that could be interesting. But again, my attention, not to skip over this one, and I'm sure Duke will not do this, but my attention is more squarely focused on Saturday and what I think, is probably the best opportunity left on the schedule for Duke to actually lose a game.
And I do want to get to that. A big game coming up with Clemson on Saturday on the road. Exciting news that it looks like Dick Vitale is going to be on the call for this one, which was supposed to be a few weeks ago. There was a bit of a setback, so how exciting. It's awesome, baby, that we're getting back on the call for a Duke basketball game. But before we get there, talking about kind of the TV copy that's there, we hear Jay Gillis throughout the course of this North Carolina game just talking about the size disparity that was there. It was noticeable on TV. You're someone who's sitting right there courtside with the crazies above you. How much of an impact did that make in not only that game, but throughout the course of the season? It's one thing to hear that Duke's the biggest team in the country, but to see it and then to see the impact that it makes on the game, truly kind of takes it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about this since the preseason, that Duke is the first team since Florida State, like over a decade ago, to not have a rotation player under 6'5". And to put that in context for Saturday, there were times when North Carolina only had one player on the court above 6'5". So we're talking about two different worlds here.
Insane.
It's not just the height, though. It's really the length. It's the wingspans. Cooper Flagg is 6'9", but he's got a 7-foot wingspan. Kaman Malawach is 7'2". He's gigantic, but he's got a 7'7" wingspan. Malik Brown, same thing, 6'10", 7'1" wingspan. Like, that length is what is so problematic for teams because, if you're fully spread out, there's just no passing lanes. There's no gaps to drive into. It's so much easier for Duke to stunt and maintain its positioning defensively because you're reaching from farther away. It allows you to have better position. So that, to me, is something that Jon Scheyer has clearly prioritized in building this team. And I think you go back and you look at his first two teams, and it's clear that he realized what he liked and what he didn't like. You go and you look at that first Duke team he had, didn't quite have the size that this team does, but in having Derek Lively and having guys who had some length and having a 7'4" man and Kyle Filipowski, you saw that was something that Jon Scheyer really leaned into. And obviously Duke had tremendous success, had that 10-game winning streak late in his first season, right. Wins the ACC tournament championship. I think it was one of the hotter teams in the country going into March, obviously ran into a physical Tennessee team. Then last year's the opposite of that. Duke is super small, 3 guards. You don't have a real rim protector. And while Duke offensively, had it going, defensively, they never had that consistency that it seems like Jon Scheyer so clearly prefers. And so he was super intentional about adding that length to this year's team. Obviously, that all starts with Cooper Flagg. But moving forward, that is something that we've seen that Jon Scheyer prefers, he relates to, he identifies with. I don't know if people knew this or not, but that's something that he gets from Brad Stevens. They've had conversations in the offseason about positional length and positional size and the benefits of that. And he fully subscribes to that theory. So, that is what has in part enabled Duke to have this top defense. It's because of the length, what it enables you to do. It allows you to cheat on defense a little bit. And clearly that's the style of play that Jon Scheyer prefers and has had the most success with.
Yeah, it's working. Don't want to change it. Keep this thing going. The roster is really fun to watch throughout the course of the season. In so many ways, it's been different guys each and every night stepping up. That could be the case tonight against Syracuse, and certainly we'll see who's set to make an impact on Saturday when Duke gets ready to take on Clemson. All right, we'll take one more break here on today's show and then start to wrap things up with our pal Brendan Marks when we return here in just a moment. Thank you again so much for making Locked On Blue Devils your first listen and first watch each and every day. For your second listen today, make sure that you go check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. Locked On ACC also presents the Squad Show each and every Thursday, where myself and the rest of the Locked On ACC school hosts get together, banter back and forth. It's a whole lot of fun to be the Duke basketball guy this time of year over on the Locked On ACC squad. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. All right, Brendan Marks of The Athletic is here with us. We're talking Duke basketball right now. I want to get to kind of the last 9 games here of the regular season, some of the challenges that are there. We've talked a whole lot about Cooper Flagg, and rightfully so, how steady Knueppel has been, kind of the old school leadership that Tyrese Proctor has provided for this team. As we go further down the roster and down the list, Brendan, if you were to maybe buy stock into someone who's going to continue to make a big time impact for this roster the rest of the way, who would that be?
Yeah, maybe not the first name who comes to mind for a lot of people, but the one to me, just seeing Duke up and close the last 2 weeks or so, especially at Wake Forest versus NC State, obviously North Carolina, it's Mason Gillis.
Yeah. He's been fun.
He has, and it's not even so much from an on-court element. Like, obviously he provides some defense, he provides some 3-point shooting. But if you go back and you watch any of those games, especially the Wake Forest in the second half, NC State late in the first half when NC State was up by as many as 13 points, in the huddles on the court, in between play breaks, Mason Gillis is the person everybody is looking at. He's the person Cooper Flagg is looking at. And I think the fact that he has Cooper's attention like that, he's kind of taken Cooper under his wing all season long. I think that really carries a lot of weight. And we've talked about Jon Scheyer adding these 3 quote unquote veterans in the transfer portal: Malik Brown, Sion James, and Mason Gillis. Mason Gillis is a unicorn compared to those other 2 in respect to the leadership and the calming presence he has on the court. And so, especially as Duke gets ready to go to Clemson, as it does, have the rest of the ACC schedule, and then hopefully make a deep run into March.
Sure.
When Duke is in the crucible, when it's in the cauldron and everything's booming and shots are flying, like Mason Gillis is the guy they look to, who has had a calming impact on this team and this young roster. So, I think especially as we talk about, there haven't been a ton of moments where Duke has been really battle tested the last month or so. It's going to have a lot more of those in the next 2 months. In those moments, I'm looking to see, can Mason Gillis sort of bring everyone together and rally them? And again, for a guy who was the 6th man of the year last year, who's, essentially Duke's 8th man, his on-court impact has at times been, relatively minor, but his ability to calm everyone, to help them stay calm, to help them go, hey, we're fine. This is what we're going to do, one play at a time. I can't overstate how valuable that is for a team that, again, otherwise is still incredibly young.
And to your point, in that Wake Forest game in particular, Mason Gillis made so many big-time shots down the stretch for Duke. He came up with loose balls when they needed it, and just found a way to help them win those basketball games. I could see it too. Looking at the rest of the bench, though, and kind of guys that have made impacts throughout the year, we had the Isaiah Evans experience in the Auburn game, and he still continues to shoot at an incredibly high percentage. Seemed to be a little trigger happy as soon as he got into the UNC game the other night right away. But
earned him a very quick hook in a spot next to Jon Scheyer.
But then later in the game, on the other end, he's making a nice defensive play on the baseline. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't fully corral it, but it's been really kind of fun to see him get better throughout the course of the year. Some games you look up and it is a 5-minute performance for Isaiah Evans, or it's a Boston College game where he comes in and he makes 4 threes on the road and really sets the tone for Duke's offense.
Yeah, this is probably not fair to Isaiah, who, I think, especially if he returns next year, could be Duke's starting 2 guard. Mm-hmm. But, I kind of look at him like gravy for this year's team. And because he's not obviously starting, he's not even the first guy off the bench, with Malik Brown, you've got Mason Gillis, you've got Caleb Foster coming in. Like he is the 8th, 9th guy. I think Jon Scheyer, especially after the Auburn game, the strategy is basically like, we're going to put Isaiah in. If he is, as you described in the North Carolina game, trigger happy, if he pulls one and he bricks it and he doesn't,
and they're not going in, yeah,
right. Then he comes and he sits down next to me for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
But
in that regard, coaching's easy, Brendan. Right?
It sure is. Yeah, right.
If he's trigger happy and the shots are going in, you get to stay. If not,
right.
Let's think about something else.
But that's basically what it is. Jon Scheyer lets it go and says, "Hey, does he have it tonight? Does he not have it tonight?" And I think that's a huge asset, obviously, but it is not something that ever forces Jon Scheyer's hand. Like, Duke has enough offense without Isaiah Evans in 90% of situations, but obviously when he's on, you take that. And Isaiah's always been, one of those, I would say, like rhythm players. I remember being at Peach Jam a couple of years ago and sitting down the wall from Jon Scheyer, and I'm trying to think who else was there. It might have been Jay Lucas, and watching Isaiah make 6 threes in the first half. And both of them got up and left at halftime. We saw what we needed to. I also remember sitting there and he had a game where he was like 1 of 12 in the first half. And again, they got up and they walked out because we saw what we needed to see. So again, it's not something where Jon Scheyer ever has to force the issue. He's not going to play a 9-10 man rotation. Like, Isaiah's going to have to earn those opportunities. But I will say this to his credit. Obviously, the Auburn game was a huge part of this, but he has earned that opportunity. Where he does get a chance in most games to at least show if he's got it going or not. And, it seems like the kind of thing where there's going to be an NCAA tournament game where Duke can't hit a shot and Isaiah comes in and hits 1 or 2 threes and sort of, gets everybody going again. I could absolutely see that being the case. And again, if you're Jon Scheyer, I think that's basically what you're hoping for.
All right. So last guy to kind of highlight here. And I don't want to speak for you, Brendan, but I've yet to come across somebody who saw this type of decline coming for Caleb Foster as he gets set to start or has played throughout his sophomore year. And this is a guy that's coming off of missing the last 9 games of that freshman season. What's it been, man? Is there a possibility of this turning around? Because I, for one, I'm holding out hope. It feels like there's just too much talent. He made too many big plays in a couple of games last season that it just feels like one of these games it's going to click, and offensively he'll be able to step up a little bit. But what have you seen? Because I certainly haven't found anybody who saw this type of play coming this year from Foster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I ever expected him. Once going back to the preseason, let me put it this way. Going back to the preseason, when it became apparent that Knueppel was a thing and was going to be the piece of this offense that he has become, you knew what Cooper Flagg was going to be. You knew what Kaman Malawach was going to be, which is a low usage, high efficiency rim roller, who has shown a little bit of a post game, to give him credit. But you knew what those three were going to be. You kind of know what Tyrese Proctor is. He's been a better 3-point shooter this year than he's been in the past. And the real unknown was, okay, where does Caleb Foster fit in the equation?
Yeah.
And, I thought that he was good at times last year. I don't think that he had some of the wiggle that you would like to see from a starting guard on a national championship team. But right now, what we've seen is somebody who's lost a lot of confidence. And it happens. It happens on every team. It happens every season. There's a guy who, it's not panning out. And obviously, not being in the starting lineup anymore has been to Duke's benefit. They've been a much better team with Sion James in the lineup. And ultimately, I think Caleb to some extent is in the same bucket as Isaiah Evans in that what he does best is not what Duke needs the most. This is a defense first team. It's been one of the three best defensive teams in the country all season long. It is long. It is strong. It builds a wall defensively. It switches everything. And again, the offense comes and goes sometimes, but the defense has been a constant all season. Isaiah Evans did not play earlier in the season because he did not match up and did not essentially, he could not provide anything defensively that the rest of Duke's players could. And I think at times Caleb Foster falls into that same boat. He's an offensive guy first. He's a guy who needs to have the ball in his hand. And unfortunately, Duke's got a couple of other guys who are a little bit better who also need the ball in their hand. So through circumstance, through a lack of confidence, through having other options available, it's been sort of a perfect storm for Caleb Foster. I don't know that he's going to be, sort of the 5-star lead guard that Duke thought that they were getting when they first recruited him, but he has to be something.
Yeah.
He has to be able to give you 10 to 15 minutes a game as a third or fourth guard for Duke to be able to win the national championship. He cannot be a zero. And so I think that honestly, you're talking about buying stock in other guys. He's the guy who, if I'm Jon Scheyer, I have to get going. I have to get to stay involved over these next 6 weeks because again, there's going to be foul trouble in the NCAA tournament. There's going to be a game where somebody gets hurt. There's going to be a game where Sion James or Tyrese Proctor just doesn't have it.
Yeah.
And you're going to need Caleb Foster to give you those minutes. And, again, that I would say is the biggest challenge Jon Scheyer has ahead of him right now is keeping him involved and figuring out some way to get something out of him for 10 or 15 minutes a night.
Yeah, and who are we to kind of tell Caleb Foster how to receive this message? But
Right.
That alone would be it for me, Brendan, that, hey, you're here for a reason. Duke wants you to play basketball here for a reason. As one of the best teams, there are still moments for you to make an impact for the squad. So we'll see if that plays out here for Duke. All right, I've prolonged it long enough. Big test coming up on Saturday against Clemson. At the time you and I are talking here, Brendan, we've yet to see Clemson take on Georgia Tech, although we feel pretty good about them taking care of business there. Kind of set the stage. I mentioned the Dick Vitale element here with this game in itself, but Duke and Clemson on Saturday, what are we on the lookout for?
So one of my favorite tools that I use as a writer is KenPom. Everybody knows the analytics site, and on KenPom they have a win probability for every game for the entire season for every team. This Clemson game is the only game left on Duke's schedule below a 75% win percentage. Wow. Duke has a 3/4 chance to win minimum every other game on its schedule. And outside of the Illinois game at Madison Square Garden and the North Carolina game in the regular season finale, the rematch, all of the other ACC games left on Duke's schedule are above a 90% win probability.
It's unreal.
I say all of that, not to say how bad the ACC is, but to show that Clemson is different. Clemson is, I would argue, the second best team in the ACC. They are, along with Louisville, probably the only other locks to make the NCAA tournament at this point from the ACC. And they have something in this team that I think can give Duke problems, in that they have an experienced team that does have some size. Most importantly, it has guys who have been there before. I would make the argument that Chase Hunter has probably been the best guard in the ACC this year, if not Chucky Hepburn at Louisville. Ian Shefflin is a legitimate big. He's someone who can hang with a Kaman Malawach, can hang with a Malik Brown. He's someone who can dare them to step outside a little bit. Jaden Zachary is another experienced veteran guard. Victor Locken has, in my opinion, completely changed Clemson's ceiling, made them a much better team. Clemson can beat Duke, which is not something you can say about most teams in the ACC and most teams in the country,
right?
Especially going on the road. I think if you're Duke and you're Jon Scheyer, you are hoping for that kind of challenge, because if there's a fear about Duke going into the postseason, it's that the ACC has been so lackluster that Duke's not going to be as battle tested as an Auburn or a Houston or an Iowa State or another team who we're talking about in the national title mix. So, Clemson, to me, it's a game that Duke absolutely 100% can win, probably will be favored in to win. But it's also a game that Duke can lose. And so I think being able to show, especially after, a game at Syracuse that should be relatively lackluster, a week after your rival, like, this is the game Duke has had circled on the calendar. I will be there, so I'm excited to see it in person. But it's a game that Duke can lose. It's a game that can give Duke that experience of being tested that it hasn't really received from the rest of the ACC slate. And obviously, should Duke win that game, I think we are talking about a better chance than not that the Blue Devils could become the first ACC's team since Duke in 1999 to go undefeated in conference play.
Yeah, well on their way with what they've been doing so far. That's exciting to hear. Excited to see that game play out. It's not often that, to your point, you see these kind of premier Duke and Clemson games, but that's what we've got for ourselves coming up on Saturday. You mentioned that you'll be there. Tell folks other ways, Brendan, that they can support you and get involved with all the great work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm biased, but I think The Athletic has the best sports writing staff, in the world, the best college basketball staff. We're all over the place, and I obviously am at a lot of Duke games, doing a lot of Duke stuff. Have a Duke project coming out next week, so I hope people tune into The Athletic to check that out. I share all my stories on X, and starting to dip my toes into the blue sky waters. So come say hi. I try to engage comment sections of all my stories. Love for people to read and to reach out and talk about the sport we all love.
Hey, it's great to see you again on the show here today, Brendan. Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. So good to see you again. I'm glad we could do this.
All right, that's Brendan Marks of The Athletic joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, and that brings our conversation today to a close. Be on the lookout for all of his outstanding coverage over at The Athletic. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils and leave us a 5-star rating and written review. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.